Hello, everybody. Popular session today. Right after lunch, and I'm up against the tour of the ODL projects, and there's what's the other one? The challenges of building a product on top of OpenDaylight with celebrities from the ODL community. Never mind. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing over the past release cycle to improve the OpenDaylight community experience. What does that mean? And some of the things that are coming over the next release cycle very much from a user point of view. So let me start off by introducing the facilities team. These are the people who work for the OpenDaylight project. Phil Robb, who's the director, senior director, I think, of, I may do job title either inflation or deflation. They don't matter that much to me. So Phil Robb is a director of SDN at the Linux Foundation and head of all things program management for ODL. Tan and George both work as part of the release management team. Tan primarily managing Jenkins, is that correct? Project builds and the build pipeline. George working as the release manager. Andy is our expert of all things infrastructure, system administrator for the Linux Foundation. Casey Kane and Art Fuel are the latest additions to the family. Casey is working as a program manager for the Linux Foundation, and Art Fuel is a technical marketing manager. And I have been working for the last release cycle part-time as a community manager for OpenDaylight, which begs the question, what is the community in the sense of OpenDaylight? Some people would think of it as the developers, the people who are working on code in the project, but I have a kind of a broader view. The community is everybody who is invested in the success of OpenDaylight. There is a kind of a gradient of participation in most community projects, starting from, yes, the core committers, the people who are defining the direction of the project, but then around that you have people who are participating in projects, people who are helping with translations, newer developers who are coming up to speed in the project, and on smaller projects. You've got, in the case of OpenDaylight, you've got the core kind of tier 0 projects and tier 1 projects, and then you've got other projects that are building on top of those. And so I think of all of this as the community. And so when I started working as community manager, I really wanted to have a focus on the users, the user community around OpenDaylight. Who uses OpenDaylight? How can we get more users? Because to be honest, coming to OpenDaylight relatively fresh at the start of the Lithium release cycle, I had trouble understanding who the users of OpenDaylight were and what I could do with it outside of the one thing that I knew, which is that you could use OpenDaylight as a network virtualization solution for OpenStack. So who uses OpenDaylight? What do they do with it? And what are their pain points? What are the things that we can fix? How can we make working with the OpenDaylight community and working with OpenDaylight better? And that was really the focus that I wanted to bring. I don't know if I've been successful, but that's certainly what I've tried to do. And so who uses OpenDaylight? We have a number of sources that we have been building to try and identify and to communicate with the users of OpenDaylight. The one is user case studies. This is a project that I started where we've been looking for specific people who are prepared to kind of do an interview, tell us what they like about OpenDaylight, what they're doing with it, what they're not doing with it, and what they'd like to see fixed. And then we write up articles, and Art Fuel has done a great job of taking that project on and running with it afterwards. The OpenDaylight Advisory Group is a new initiative that started this release cycle, where we have some Momentum users, and this is primarily Neela and Phil, who have been the driving force behind this, where we've been meeting regularly, and we've had presentations from Comcast, Cable Labs, and Orange, talking a little bit about what they've been doing again with OpenDaylight. And finally, we have a user survey that went out quite recently, where we asked the general user community of OpenDaylight, what stage is your usage of this software? What are you doing with it? What are the things that you'd like to see happen? So the user case studies, this was some of the sources that we've used, the places where we've gone to look for these users, primarily talking to TSC members, who are also members of the vendor community, developing products and delivering services to OpenDaylight users. So that's been a great source for me. And also asking on the user list, which is, again, there is a broad and a community that we can do a better job, I think, of engaging. Subscribe to the user list there. And finally, the OpenDaylight advisory group itself has been a source of case studies. The first meeting of that was held in January. And there are currently 12, although with Neela's confirmation earlier that Tencent are now joining, that moves to 13, covering telco, cable, financial services, and broader enterprise. And the full list is there. Actually, that URL needs to be changed. So it's /advisors now, not /project/advisors. There was an update to the website last week. So that's my excuse. And we meet monthly. The meetings are, the first few in terms of seeding the process were private, but now the meetings are open to all. And you're welcome to join. The user survey I mentioned. Essentially, we've got a broad community. We have 128 companies responded to this. 73% are either deploying or planning to deploy OpenDaylight. We cover a number of industry sectors. And the main use cases are for network function virtualization in the telco sector, cloud orchestration, cloud networking, people who are using OpenDaylight, as I said at the start, as a network virtualization solution for OpenStack, fulfillment in the sense of providing quality of service, providing VPN as a service, services like that, and then finally network monitoring and analytics. If you were at Neela's keynote, he spoke at length about all of this. So who do we have in the case studies? They're being gathered primarily on two places, the OpenDaylight Wiki and the OpenDaylight blog. We're in the process of moving to the blog as the standard place for these, but there are still some in both places. There are currently 8 online, and there are more being developed. And they're broadly, I would categorize the users who have participated in the case studies as either vendors who are building product offerings, either building a product offering on top of OpenDaylight or building a product on top of OpenDaylight, so using OpenDaylight as a platform. University research, so this is universities who are doing research into networking and using OpenDaylight as a platform, a solid base on which they can develop their experimental algorithms, covering EHU, Géant. Géant is a university, is a conglomerate, a collective of European universities providing, among other things, WAN connectivity between universities. The University of Luxembourg is another project with multiple research projects building on top of OpenDaylight. And finally, end users. Cornell University is using it to manage their OpenFlow network. OPNFV is a nonprofit that's using OpenDaylight essentially for network virtualization. Cable Labs, Comcast, and AT&T are all recognizable household names. Some detail from some of these case studies. Cornell is managing some Dell switches, OpenFlow devices. This is a project that they've been using with OpenDaylight Hydrogen. So not helium, not lithium. They've been using OpenDaylight essentially from day one, which is, I think, rather brave, but they've been very successful in doing so. And their plan is to move to helium or lithium in the near future, or it was the last time I spoke to them. OPNFV, so this is the open platform for NFV, an industry collaborative effort between network equipment providers, telcos, communication service providers, and platform vendors like Red Hat. It's a reference implementation of an NFV platform which is building primarily on OpenDaylight and OpenStack. There are other alternatives for the SDN layer. And obviously, NFV is a core use case that's being targeted for their So things like service function chaining and network quality of service, policy and enforcement are very important for NFV. And key future functionality there is the engagement that we've primarily had between OPNFV and OpenDaylight has been around service function chaining, as I mentioned. So I'm not going to try and pronounce the name of the university. This is Basque. I don't speak Basque. This is the Basque University in San Sebastian, maybe? I'm not sure. So GEON is a pan-European research network, and they use OpenDaylight as a basis for network research. Some of the things that they've been doing are things like dynamic path computation. So what that means is when you have a degradation in network quality of service on one network path, that the controller can identify that and react to it by dynamically reprogramming the flows on the switches and getting your traffic by an alternative path. I think that's an awesome application. So this is in the context of university to university WAN. Comcast, and there are a number of others. This is just a selection, but Comcast have written, gave a presentation at length where they discussed their usage of OpenDaylight, starting from their very experimental first steps. Their essential desire is to get network management complexity, it's simplification of their network management, so getting operational efficiency, and also moving to IPv6. So they've got some proof of concept applications around, again, network intelligence, so responding to the state of the network, and using Lisp mapping to do L3 VPNs. And finally, I'd like to give a call out to, this is a new initiative that Art Fuel has started recently. One of the things that we want to provide in the OpenDaylight Foundation is a platform for people who are building solutions or service offerings on top of OpenDaylight to participate in the community, because part of the community of OpenDaylight users is going to be customers of these companies. So we're providing a solution provider directory, which allows you a platform to communicate that you're aligned with OpenDaylight in terms of product or service offerings, which I think is a very good thing. So what are some of the things that we've done to improve the community experience? I've talked a little bit about who our users are. What are they doing with OpenDaylight, and how have we been trying to identify those pain points and improve? Well, one of the places that we've been looking is the first-time user experience. Constant feedback to OpenDaylight has been that you arrive, the website has the marketing spiel, SDN, and how it's going to change the industry, and the wiki has the down-in-the-weeds, day-to-day happenings of the projects. There's here are the features that we plan to do in the next release. Here's the specification documents for those features, and here are the patches that we're in the process of reviewing. There's nothing in the middle that says, okay, now I've got the install guide, I followed the install guide, I have OpenDaylight installed, what's next? And so one of the things that we've been doing has been to focus on getting started documentation, focusing on some user task-focused documentation, and also in general, making the wiki someplace which is more welcoming for people who are not developers, active developers in the project. So cleaning up naming conventions, editorial guidelines for pages, marking pages that are out of date as requiring an update or at least having some human eyes come and look and see if this information is still valid for lithium. And also we've put in place a new front page, which I think makes things a little bit easier to read and certainly makes it more welcoming for new users. In terms of documentation in general, one of the things that we've been working on in this release cycle is the documentation has either been project level, the OVSDB project, for example, or the GBP project, documenting the various APIs and interfaces and the ways that you would use that project, but that is not necessarily meaningful to a user. So we've been identifying higher level user stories, like, as I mentioned at the start, I want to use OpenDaylight with OpenStack. How do I do that? I want to manage my OpenFlow switches. How do I do that? And concentrating on bridging that gap between I've now got it installed, what can I do next, to I feel like I've done something useful with this software and I'm now a step better than I was before. In terms of documentation, we've also moved from DocBook XML, which was the format for the previous release, to ASCII doc, which makes things considerably easier in terms of lowering the contribution. ASCII doc is essentially a plain text markup format similar to wiki text, which allows you to essentially, as a new user, or as somebody who's not familiar with the documentation tooling of open source projects for the last 10 years, to come in and say, okay, here's something I did, and have that copied and pasted directly from an email and have it be useful to others. So documentation is a place where we're definitely looking for help and contribution. And I just today, during the keynotes, when this came up in the panel discussion with the developers, created a documentation wish list page. So if you have a task which you would like to see documented, you don't know how to do it, or you've done it and it wasn't very well documented, please add it there. It's documentation/wish list on the wiki. It's a very recent addition. So. Okay, the other thing that we've spent a lot of time on in this release cycle is what's coming next. Two aspects to that. OpenDaylight has traditionally been difficult for new projects to figure out all of the things they need to do. Right? We have a number of pages that exist, and certainly the facilities team has been very active in updating pages about here's how you integrate into the tooling of the project. But how do you integrate socially into the project? How do we help new projects to understand the expectations of them from the facilities team? So especially Phil has been spending a lot of time on onboarding new projects and helping newer projects really understand what's expected of them and how to be productive and how to be effective as a new OpenDaylight project. So we've provide guidance on groups and individuals on their expectations and maybe point to other projects which have similar goals that they can engage with. And that's also the opportunity for us to make introductions between people who are already in the community and people who are coming into the community for the first time. The other next generation aspect is we've got new projects which are proposing actual functionality and real code. And then we have interns. We've been running an internship program for the past 2 years. And this year, the program doubled in size from 7 interns to 14. We've had a lot of support from the developer community in terms of helping new developers, new university students, come up to speed with something like OpenDaylight, which is, as a networking project, more, let's say there's a certain requirement for hardware, which sets a bar to entry, or a requirement to knowledge, which sets a bar to entry, which is quite high for university developers. But because we've got this pairing up of new developers with senior developers in the community, we've really seen people engaged, effective, and at the end of their internship, and that's the most important thing to me, showing interest in continuing to work with OpenDaylight and seeing the opportunity to grow professionally in the SDN field and specifically with OpenDaylight. Another thing that we've been very active in doing is building bridges between different projects. So there are regular meetings with the OPNFV community, which I have been at the origin of. And so OPNFV, there are occasionally issues where the OPNFV community is having a little bit of trouble getting something working, and then we create this bridge between the OPNFV and the OpenDaylight project, or situations where the OPNFV project would like to drive an agenda or would like to drive features into the roadmap of OpenDaylight projects. We also have a lot of overlap between OPNFV and OpenDaylight, where there are leaders, for example, like Brady Johnson, who's the leader of the service function chaining project in OpenDaylight, and also actively engaging with the OPNFV project in service function chaining. And also, I see Daniel Farrell here in the audience, who's worthy of a call out as well in terms of packaging OpenDaylight and working on Puppet scripts to enable the automated deployment of OpenDaylight with other pieces of software like OpenStack, which really helps projects like OPNFV adopt it. We're also actively participating in OpenStack Design Summit. So this is where we get to, make known our needs of the Neutron project in OpenStack and ensure that the needs of SDN controllers are heard in that environment. And B, also listen to the Neutron developers and what they're saying in terms of the scope of the Neutron project and figure out how we can work together to fulfill that scope effectively with OpenDaylight. Okay, one more thing that I'd like to spend quite a bit of time on, and I'm leaving quite a bit of time at the end because I want to make sure that we have time for questions, because we've got George, Tan, and Andy here in the front row, and myself. So if you have questions about how the facilities team works, or what we can do for you, or if you have complaints that you'd like to make about the community and things that you'd like to see better, we're all ears. So one of the newer initiatives that I've been working on is user stories, and this name may change. But the idea of user stories are you define higher level user tasks that you would expect users to want to accomplish, or that you know that users want to accomplish with your project. And then you break down those tasks into subtasks, and you say, well, I want to use OpenDaylight as a network virtualization solution for OpenStack. It's the one I've been using, I think, maybe 4 or 5 times at this point in the presentation. If you want to break that down, you can say, well, as a cloud user, I want to create a new virtual machine, have that automatically get an IP address, be connected with the subnet associated with that tenant, and have the security rules that I've defined automatically applied to that VM. As a tenant admin, I want to be able to create new networks, connect those networks to virtual routers, and so on. As the cloud admin, I want to be able to add a new hypervisor node and connect a new virtual switch to the cluster that's managed by Neutron. I want to be able to perhaps define VPNs to connect different data centers, and so on. I want to be able to manage my underlay. And so you break down this high-level task to, here are the features that we need to be able to fulfill all of the users who are affected by this higher-level task. And then from that, you can identify where the project fulfills those, where the documentation is potentially lacking, where, for example, so there are a number of places where you can then use these user stories. One is in documentation in terms of documenting the things that you expect your users to want to do. Testing, identifying test scenarios to verify that the platform fulfills expectations. In terms of usability, you can identify where things are not as easy as they should be, and then concentrate your efforts on simplifying those. Make the common things easy and the hard things possible. And finally, in terms of development, helping align prioritization and also identifying gaps. Right? So rather than saying, oh, IPv6, we can do IPv6, well, then maybe you realize that GRE tunnels with IPv6 endpoints doesn't work yet. And that's, oh, well, yes, except for that, we do IPv6, for example. And I will be having a Beryllium Developer Summit session on user stories at 9:45 on Friday. And my colleague, Ju Lim, who has been driving this effort, inside Red Hat, and we're hopeful to get more traction for this in the OpenDaylight community. We shall be participating remotely in that, so you're all welcome. So what's next? What are the top priorities for the OpenDaylight project as a whole, but also me in terms of community management? Well, the OpenDaylight board has set a focus on 2 high-level goals. One is facilitating the use of OpenDaylight for network function virtualization. And the other is, network virtualization. And then the other is facilitating the use of OpenDaylight for network function virtualization. So I don't know if everybody here knows the difference between network virtualization and network function virtualization. No? So network function virtualization is essentially the virtualization of network nodes in telco networks. Services like broadband access, radio access, VoIP would all be considered network functions. Video streaming, CDN. Network virtualization is the what's the word that gets used? The disaggregation of the control plane and the data plane. So the way that data flows across your network is managed by the edge devices. Those flows are programmed by a central controller, in this case, OpenDaylight. So you define your network, your virtual network topology centrally, and have that definition enforced at the edge. So in terms of focus on these two, I would like to break down the user stories for both of these in considerable detail, identify the gaps, both in terms of functionality and in terms of documentation, so that we can make sure that that OpenDaylight is easy to use or easy to adopt for these two very high-level core focuses. And finally, focusing on OPNFV and the relationship between OpenDaylight and OPNFV for the NFV use case, I think is a good use of our time. So that's in terms of improving the community experience. The other thing that we work on, and by we, I'm talking not just about the facilities team here, but also more broadly, the Linux Foundation marketing and events team. We talk about growing the community. How do we get more people using and engaged with OpenDaylight? So one of the things we do is we participate in 10 to 15 events per year. I didn't get an exact count, but it's roughly one a month. That covers every major market segment where OpenDaylight is relevant, from networking, cloud, open source, network function virtualization, telco space. And we also facilitate community participation in stands and also community creation of stands. So that there have been a number of events where the OpenDaylight events team has assisted in providing marketing materials and so on, but the actual engagement in the event has been entirely community driven. And we also have a special call out here for OpenDaylight user groups. There are 22 oddlugs around the world. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. It's how I pronounce it. We have, in the last 6 months, we've had regional meetings across the USA and several across Europe and Asia. And there's interest in growing this program this year. So I would like to add some structure so that we're aware of all of the oddlug meetings that are going on, so that we're not just aware, but that we're also ensuring that we make regular contact with oddlug leaders, that we're identifying potential new oddlug leaders. And so this is that not everybody is going to come to the OpenDaylight Summit, right? There's just not enough money in the world to bring everybody who's interested in networking to Santa Clara to listen to this. So we have to go and find people. We have to go and talk to people where they are. And that means engaging with OpenDaylight, creating OpenDaylight user groups, and engaging with OpenStack meetups across the world so that people are aware of the things that are happening in OpenDaylight and how they can adopt it and engage. And there is some budget, by the way. I didn't mention that. We had the OpenDaylight Foundation specifically has a budget to support the creation of and the running of OpenDaylight user groups. And I know that Daniel, again, to call you out, was at the origin of a meetup in Raleigh, which had a little beer and pizza budget.
Yeah, I would add that they're very supportive. It's pretty easy to get one started. It's pretty easy to get support from real upstream folks.
Yep.
Funding. So I encourage you to go back to your home cities and start it yourself. It's trivial.
To repeat for the camera, the foundation is very supportive. It's very easy to get the money, and they're very eager to send out materials. And so Daniel would recommend that you all go home and create a new oddlug and start a meetup. Okay, I would like to now hand over to Giles Heron and George Zhao, who are going to go into a lot more detail about one specific OpenDaylight community and some of the work that they've been doing in China in the last 12 months and the growth that we've seen in the community there.
Well, thank you, Dave. My name is George Zhao, and from Huawei. For people who don't know me, I'm also OpenDaylight Release Manager for Helium and Lithium. And also, as Dave mentioned, I'm a member of OpenDaylight facility team. So today I'm going to talk about the community in China. So why China? What makes China so special? So as we are here, we actually take a lot of things for granted. But in China, you actually don't have access or very limited access for Gmail. You cannot watch YouTube. Yeah, you cannot use Google Hangouts. Basically, all the Google things you have difficult to access. Google Plus. You cannot do Facebook, give it a thumb up. And you don't Twitter. So it can go even worse, actually. You have a limited access for IRC channel, and you will have difficulties to do meetups. So as people in the OpenDaylight communities, we know we actually, other than the wiki page and WebEx, we rely on this heavily on these social network sites to share the knowledge, to share the information, to build a community. So yeah, we see how special China is, but they actually do have OpenDaylight communities there. They use a website to share the the architecture of OpenDaylight. They have a blog to share the informations and user stories, how to configure, how to set up, how to start up OpenDaylight controller platform. They actually follow us pretty quickly. Like we have the third release, Lithium release, and they actually have translated everything in Chinese, including the architecture diagram. They have a form of OpenDaylight. This was actually in open source form here. And as the right box highlighted, it's ODL, stands for ODL Chinese Community. So even though they have some difficulties to access to share some of the tools we have, they actually have communities there. And now, this is the picture I took while I was in China last month, in Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Hangzhou. The top one in the green one is Marty Mar. If you go to this morning's, Neela mentioned like Tencent, they said they coded Marty Mar for that. They require all the partners controller, SDN controller has to be OpenDaylight compatible by end of the year. So that's actually coding for the. Do I have pointer? No. Okay. Yeah, that's basically the person it called from, Marty Ma, Chief Architect and Senior Director of Tencent. So now we meet them and we made the community. What kind of feedbacks they give to us? For the audience who don't understand Chinese, the first two basically just say how great OpenDaylight is and how much they contribute to SDN open source framework. The majority of the feedback I got from them is MDCell and young tools are pretty have high learning curves. But once you overcome that learning curve, they feel the OpenDaylight platform is relatively easy to develop an application on top of it. And when people actually told me that it's impossible for them to develop in such a short time SDN controller without leveraging OpenDaylight platform, MDCL, and young tools. And they wish OpenDaylight platform can be as robust as Linux kernel. So from the feedback we see, actually there is no difference than any other communities in the world, which means we're basically on the same page with the community in China, and we can collaborate together and we can contribute together. Now I would like to mention a special event happened about 3 months ago. It's a week-long event, and it's very interesting. It's combined with a bootcamp, hackathon, and actually black horse computation together. And it's sponsored by BAT, which is a major internet company, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, hosted by Cisco, and 18 major companies and universities, including China Telecom, China Mobile, China Unicom, and university like Tsinghua University, participate in this event. I will give to Giles, which has been there in day one and designed and actually been there as an instructor, also as a judge, to give more stories of this. Yeah, I heard like one picture worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, there's probably 1,000 people in this picture. I think I'm in there somewhere. Is that me there? I think it is. And unfortunately, I forgot to bring my my very nice ODL bootcamp jacket with me this week. Yeah, it was a great event actually. I think really surpassed all of our expectations in terms of just the quality of the work that got done at the event. So. What we did was basically we went over, had, I guess, 3 days of instruction, and then sort of, 3.5, and then sort of a day and a half of hacking at the end of it. And so what we did was we divided the students up into teams of 3, and as much as possible we tried to mix people up. So, in terms of having the Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent kind of guys, then the telco guys, so the 3 Chinas, Netcom, Unicom, and Mobile. And then the students from places like Tsinghua. And we tried to put teams that were kind of a mix, people who didn't really know each other, and allow them to come up with ideas of what to do based on the stuff we taught them that week. So there was kind of a focus, I guess, on NetConf Yang as a southbound plugin. And we had demo network setups using Viral, which is our virtual internet routing lab, where you can basically fire up multiple virtual Cisco devices, back to the sort of classic challenge, I think, Dave, you were referring to earlier about hardware and this problem of bootstrapping. It's awesome now that everything's virtualized. So, they typically have, a few XR virtual instances, OpenDaylight talking NetConf Yang to them, and then just played with it, really. And then they came up with various good ideas. In terms of the hackathon, some people focused on that. Some people did more OpenFlow kind of work with Mininet. There was a real mixture. What we found, I guess, was that the most successful teams tended to the teams where you had a good mix of skills. Perhaps you had a network guy who wasn't necessarily a coder, but kind of understood the network problem space. You had somebody who was good at the back end and could either understand MD-SAL. I mean, one group, even though it was a 1-week hackathon, one team, in fact, not surprisingly, the winning team, actually wrote code in MD-SAL within that 1-week hackathon. The team who came second, I think, were even more impressive to me, in that one of the guys said he'd never seen Python before, but he wrote 700 lines of Python overnight. I mean, you just can't compete with that, can you? It's amazing. And those sort of teams, we had the back-end coding expertise, but then also somebody who could do front-end. So a lot of these demos had nice GUIs on. So the actual quality that we got at the end of it for the hackathon results was just phenomenal. And I think, it was the first boot camp we'd done, so we were, very much new to this as much as the students. We're now trying to execute on that as a much more regular thing. We actually got Talak to help us with setting up the boot camp and delivering the training, really so that we can scale the whole process. I know they're here this week. Chuck, who's one of the main instructors, is over on the ONF stand at the moment. And we're looking to do these both internally and externally, on a regular, ongoing basis. So we had one internally last week. And really interesting, actually, to see the difference in an internal boot camp where people perhaps have a better idea of what you need from the network, but versus this one with students in China where the coding expertise was just, out of this world. And you sort of wish you could get both in one boot camp. And I think we will, get there eventually. And certainly we plan to just iterate on this and keep scaling it. So yeah, it was a really fantastic event. And we've had a lot of follow-up from it. So students regularly, contacting me and saying, oh, how do I do this? How do I do that? Et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, really awesome. I didn't realize we had another slide. So there you go. Yes, it was the first one we've done, but we have more coming, and certainly, particularly in China. So we are, really looking to go back to China as soon as possible. do a sort of a Mark II with the same people, but also extend it out into other areas, so Shenzhen, Shanghai, etc.
Thanks, Charles. I have a few questions, actually. So is all of the training materials here, are they all Creative Commons, reusable, public, or?
I'm not sure what the scoop is on that. I think that was the goal, was to get stuff out there. I don't know, and of course with all these things there's always commercial stuff behind it. It's who owns what and who pays for what. But ask Carrie, she's on our stand.
And was this native language? Did you do this in Chinese or in English?
No. That was one thing I guess that is quite difficult. I mean, we had small amounts in native language, so we had some of our own people there. But the instruction was in English.
Okay.
And that, I guess that does set a bar. But, as George was saying, our stuff's getting translated fast, so hopefully, we can overcome that.
Okay.
I think often what you find is perhaps it's easier for people if you have quite a structured instruction environment to follow. What then gets trickier is if you're then trying to do more the kind of Q&A, because that's where perhaps the language barrier is trickier.
How much time went into preparing this? I mean, it seems like a big endeavor.
A lot of work. Yeah, it was a huge piece of work.
Okay, well, awesome. I hope we can figure out how to scale it and repeat it. So that's it. We now have 6.5 minutes for questions, and please don't feel like you should direct your questions only to me. Can I get Tan, George, and Andy to stand up and turn around so that... Okay, so Andy is the sysadmin, Tan is our continual integration release manager, and George is our release manager. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pipe up. So the question is, I mentioned the improving documentation in the wiki. Is there some organized way we're doing it? Well, there is the documentation project, which is run by Colin Dixon. In terms of creating new tutorials, it's not something that's been structured, and it's something I'd like to see structured better. So I guess that's another one on the to-do list. I also saw Phil Robbs crept in at the back there during the presentation, so I'm going to also point to Phil if there are any questions I don't know how to answer. So nothing particularly structured, but as I mentioned, there is the wiki.opendaylight.org/documentation, or it's /view/documentation is the root page, and I would expect us to be ramping up in terms of organizing that and trying to get more tutorials for the next release. Daniel.
Anybody ask of the community that you would like us to work on for community building and training the community?
Is there an ask of the community in terms of things that we'd specifically like you to work on? Yes, I think, is the answer to that. One of the things that I don't know if this exists is I think lowering that bar of getting engaged around MD-SAL and Yang. So some kind of hello worlds in Yang and MD-SAL and getting started with helping people to have a kind of a, I think so as a Puppet expert, you've no doubt gone through the Puppet docs. I think they do it really well in terms of they have a Puppet bootstrapping documentation. I think we could do something similar for OpenDaylight, and also in terms of the ways that people can use OpenDaylight. So user level tasks, things like how do I do WAN optimization with OpenDaylight? How do I do layer 3 VPNs with OpenDaylight? Kind of simple, one task, and then kind of, because that's the trick is those things all take kind of 2 or 3 modules to string together in certain configuration. So that's the kind of things that people want to do, though. Anything else? In which case, I will say thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the community.